Hey, what's up, everybody? True Boxing here. Thank you for coming back to get hit with the truth. So today we're doing the Tszyu versus Brian Mendoza breakdown video, as Tszyu is set to defend what is going to be his WBO Junior Middleweight Championship of the World at 154 against WBC interim champion Brian Mendoza on Saturday, October 14th on Showtime, the 15th in Australia. That's where the fight's going to be, so that's why I say that. So before we get into that, if you could smash the like button, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, I really do appreciate any and all support that I can get as I continue to build my channel up here. Now, if you haven't seen my breakdown videos in the past, and even if you have, the way they start is I discuss the fight, what it means, what's at stake, all those kind of details. Then I get into each fighter individually. In this case, the favorite and the champion at going into the fight is going to be Tszyu. That's what we know for sure right now. So we would start with him, and we do the same thing on both sides. I discuss what they've done coming into the fight. I ask the same questions on both sides, and then at the end of it, I do, is it better for boxing if one or the other wins? And then I give my final prediction at the end of the video. So, this fight right here between these two fighters, Tszyu and Mendoza, it's a big fight at 154 because it's going to establish the next chapter at 154. I personally feel Jermell Charlo, the undisputed champion, is done and at 154. And the one thing that we know for sure is the WBO is stripping Charlo this Saturday after he gets announced as the undisputed super welterweight champion in his fight with Canelo Alvarez. After that announcement, he is going to be stripped, and Tszyu will be upgraded to full champion, as he is the interim champion right now in the WBO. That means on the 14th of October, Tszyu will be defending the title for the first time against Brian Mendoza. Now, what we don't know is that, is Mendoza's interim title going to be at stake as well? Or will the full WBC championship be on the line? Is this going to end up being a title unification bout? Because what if Charlo pulls out the upset against Canelo? I don't think he will, but what if he does? Or what if Charlo, after the fight, just doesn't make a decision, doesn't tell the WBC if he's returning to 154 or not, and the WBC just decides to name him champion in recess and upgrades Mendoza to full champ, making this a unification bout between Tszyu and Mendoza. I think it's very, very possible that could happen, but it hasn't happened yet, and we don't know the other, if the interim belt's going to be on the line for Mendoza. But what we do know is that it for sure will be for the WBO super welterweight / junior middleweight, whatever you want to call it, 154-pound title. That's going on the line between these two guys. So, let's get into the details, the height, and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to start discussing that at the beginning. In this one, Brian Mendoza has a 1.5 inch height advantage. He's 5'10", where Tszyu's 5'8.5". But Tszyu has a 2-inch reach advantage, surprisingly. So that's a little interesting when you have opposites between the height and the reach. So I think that kind of levels them out. They're pretty much right around the same height and the same age. Brian Mendoza is 29, Tszyu is 28. Now, let's get into the defending champion going into this fight, Tszyu, and talk about what he's done rolling into this. He's fighting at home. He's fighting in his home country of Australia. He's done that in his previous 2 fights. We go back to his last 3 fights, which date back to, I think it was March or April of last year, 2022, when he took on Terrell Gausha, former world title challenger. He got put down in the first round, and then from there, just proceeded to pretty much dominate the rest of the fight. Kind of got a workmanlike, unanimous decision as he stayed undefeated. Then earlier this year, he took on Tony Harrison. And Tony Harrison was coming off of a big win against Sergio Garcia. There's a lot of people that thought Harrison was going to go into Australia and upset him, myself included, and I couldn't have been more wrong, as Tim Tszyu absolutely dominated Tony Harrison, broke him down, beat him up, and stopped him in 9 rounds to become the WBO interim champion. He was waiting around for Charlo. That fight got scratched because Charlo got injured, and so the interim title went on the line. Then in June, Tszyu decided to stay busy when the Charlo fight wasn't any closer due to the lingering injury, and Tszyu decided to defend his interim belt against former world title challenger Carlos Ocampo. This one was an interesting fight going in too, because Ocampo's a scrappy fighter, and Ocampo also gave Sebastian Fundora a competitive outing last year. But Tim Tszyu made Ocampo look the way Errol Spence made Ocampo look when they fought years ago for the welterweight title. He destroyed Ocampo in 1 round and retained his interim title. And so Tim Tszyu is rolling into this fight with Brian Mendoza red hot right now. He is good to go, and he is looking to show why he is what he believes the top guy at 154 moving forward. And for him, this is big because, again, what if the WBC allows this to be an interim or a unification bout, and they declare Charlo the champion of recess? If that happens, that's huge for Tim Tszyu, because that means Charlo can come down and challenge him, or they could fight for undisputed, especially if the WBA and the IBF allow Charlo to stay their champion. They could fight for undisputed. So he still gets what he wants, and they both go in as champions, and it's a bigger fight than it would have been before. So Tim Tszyu, this is huge for him right here. So, and there's also Terrence Bud Crawford sitting there that could move up in weight and fight him. So we'll get into that, but a lot at stake for Tim Tszyu heading into this fight right here with Brian Mendoza. Now, what does Tim Tszyu need to do to win this fight? I really think what he needs to do is just be smart and break down Brian Mendoza. Work the body. He is a guy that, if he's in condition, he can, I don't know if I'd say he's more experienced in bigger fights, because Mendoza has been in there with some good fighters. But I just think he needs to focus on working the body and breaking down Brian Mendoza. I think that's his key, but he cannot get caught. Because the one thing that I saw is Terrell Gaucher caught him clean, and Gaucher's not a big-time puncher, but he has power. Brian Mendoza's got pop. He's 22-2 with 16 knockouts. He can hit. And if you don't think he can hit, go back and look at his fucking knockout against Fundora. He blasted Fundora with that left hook. And ironically, I believe that's the same punch. I could be wrong, but that could be the same punch. No, I think I am wrong on the Gaucher thing. But the point is we know Tim Tszyu can be dropped and stunned and hurt. So Brian Mendoza's coming into this with nothing to lose. He's a road warrior heading into this fight. He's the underdog. He knows that all it takes is one, and he's perfectly okay with catching Tszyu. So if Tszyu's overlooking him at all, he's making a fucking huge mistake, because Brian Mendoza is that guy that will knock you off your block. So so make sure you're checking out. Tim Tszyu's got to break down Brian Mendoza, in my opinion. Take him into the deep waters and try to drown him after breaking him down. Don't just go toe to toe. Set it up. And Tszyu has been smart about setting it up in his previous 2 fights since Gaucher in that knockdown. So he's broke down and set up his power shots against both Harrison and Ocampo, and that's led to his success. So I think if he does that, he's got a good chance. Can Tim Tszyu win this fight by knockout? I think he can. Tszyu does have one-punch power, as you saw with Ocampo, but he also can break a fighter down. So I think it can come either way against Mendoza, but Mendoza can take shots. He's never been knocked out. So I do think, it's going to be more of a breakdown type knockout if Tszyu wins. And then, can Tszyu win a decision? I personally feel he's the better boxer between these two guys overall. So I do think he can win a decision if it goes there. And he definitely needs to be built for 12 because Brian Mendoza, again, has lost 2 fights, but neither one of them was by knockout. So, yeah, I do think he needs to be ready for 12 hard rounds in this fight, but I do believe he can win a decision. Now, what does a win mean for Tszyu? And as I was discussing a little while ago, it means everything. If he can beat Brian Mendoza in this fight, again, we don't know what's exactly at stake overall yet, but we know for sure that it's at the very least the WBO title. So he's a champion at 154, no matter what. If he wins this fight, he could end up being both the WBO and the WBC champion. Or he could, be an interim champion of the WBC, which means he goes straight to a title shot against Charlo if Charlo decides to stay here. And if Charlo doesn't, he gets upgraded to full champion. So any one of those situations works out for Tszyu and sets up bigger fights, especially if a guy like Bud Crawford decides to move to 154 and challenge for the WBO or WBC belt, which that is a custom with both those governing bodies. They allow their champions to move up and move ahead of any top contender for the belt. So Tszyu is looking at only big fights if he wins this fight here. So a lot rides on the line of victory for Tszyu here. Now, what does a loss mean? A loss would be devastating to Tszyu. It'd be the first loss of his career. He'd be losing in front of his home crowd when he's the favorite. And he'd be missing out on everything I just said, and right now it would totally derail him, and he's on fire right now. So a loss would be devastating to Tszyu, any kind of loss, because I think some people believe that we've already seen how good Mendoza is. A lot of people feel that he was getting dominated against Fundora and he got lucky. He's already lost to Jesus Ramos. I think a lot of people are looking at him as kind of a journeyman gatekeeper type guy that got lucky. But we don't know how good Tszyu is yet. And I think that would take away that if he even loses a close decision to Mendoza. But if he were to get knocked out or one-punched, and dominated, it really takes away from the allure, the mystique of Tszyu and how good he could be. So a loss would be devastating. So now let's switch it over to the challenger heading into this fight so far that we know, the WBC interim champion at 154, Brian Mendoza. Coming into this fight, Brian Mendoza, his last 3 fights date back to March of last year. He was coming off the loss to Jesus Ramos in 2021, and he scored a 5th round TKO over little-known Benjamin Whitaker, I think his name was. Then he followed that up and got the biggest win of his career, a 5th round knockout win over former unified champion Jason Rosario. And that turned everything around right there. Rosario had been knocked out in 8 rounds against Jermell Charlo a couple years earlier as they attempted to unify belts. He had knocked out Julian J. Rock Williams, who was the number 1 guy at 154, did Rosario. So Mendoza knocking him out really elevated Mendoza to a high position at 154. Right there. Like, it put him in the driver's seat to do something bigger. And something bigger came. Earlier this year, he got an opportunity to challenge Sebastian Fundora, the WBC interim champion, who was coming off the fight of the year last year in his war with Erickson Lubin. And Fundora was dominating the fight on points. He had won every round. And then in the 7th round, Brian Mendoza landed a fucking money left hook to the chin and then a right that laid out the towering inferno, the 6'6", Sebastian Fundora, laid him out flat. And Brian Mendoza scored, in my opinion, the upset of the year with that win. And a heavy candidate for knockout of the year as he became the WBC interim super welterweight champion. So, wasting no time, Tim Tszyu decided when the Charlo fight fell through that he wanted Brian Mendoza, and now Brian Mendoza gets a golden opportunity, his first title shot overall. He could, at the time, he could be upgraded to full champion. It could end up being a title unification. So this is huge for Brian Mendoza. He's coming off his 2 biggest wins of his career as well. So he is, quote unquote, on fire as well. Even though he's losing every round to Fundora, he knocked Fundora out in the 7th round. So he's just walking into this fight with that nothing to lose type attitude. He's a road warrior. He's the underdog. He's used to that, and he's ready to go. So Brian Mendoza, huge opportunity here, and he's ready to cash in on it. He's hungry. And he has the right kind of attitude. Can't wait to see him go up against Tim Tszyu in this fight. So what does Mendoza need to do to win this fight against Tim Tszyu? And what he needs to do is, yes, he needs to be ready for 12 rounds, conditioning wise, but he needs to go in here and really try to mix it up and try to test Tim Tszyu's chin early, but not leave himself open, because Tim Tszyu can bang. Both these guys have 22 victories on their resume. They're Mendoza's 22-2, 16 knockouts. Tim Tszyu is 22-0, but 17 knockouts. These guys can bang. They can hit. So he needs to try to set up a big shot against Mendoza, against Tszyu, but he's also not coming in a one-sided disadvantage in terms of height and reach like he did against Sebastian Fundora. Mendoza, youth-wise, is almost the same age. He's 1 year older. He has the opportunity to really make this a fight and be competitive in this fight. And he's also never been knocked out, so he also needs to ride that wave and test himself out. He took everything Fundora had and didn't go down. You know, this guy's tough. His other loss was to some nobody by an 8-round split decision. So this guy has a chin and he can bang. He needs to go challenge himself and fight in this fight. And again, he's not at a height and reach a disadvantage. He actually has a height advantage. The reach, he's 2 inches shorter on the reach, but he's got the height advantage. These guys are pretty damn near even. Age, height, reach, pretty damn near even. They balance out. So Brian Mendoza really needs to go and try to make a fight of it and not let Tim Tszyu dictate the pace and all that. And I think he'll have an opportunity if he can do that. If he can show Tim Tszyu that he's not afraid. And I think he will. Now, can Brian Mendoza win this fight by knockout? You know, I think he can. He's got power. You saw that he can knock out. He could catch somebody with a shot. And Tim Tszyu got caught against Gaucher last year. A guy that is not as big a puncher as Brian Mendoza. So, yeah, I think Brian Mendoza can win this fight by knockout. Can he win a decision? It's going to be tough, you know, but I think, you know, stylistically, he could probably get in there and win a decision. I don't think he'll blow Tim Tszyu out, because I think Tszyu is the better boxer, but I think, you know, a grinded out, tough, toe-to-toe type fight, he might be able to take a close decision. It's possible. Now, what does a win mean for Brian Mendoza here? Oh, it means everything. I mean, a win leads to big time fights for Brian Mendoza. You know, a win here, like I said, he probably can get a fight with Charlo. He could probably fight whoever he wants if he upsets Tszyu in this fight. Maybe it leads to a rematch, which is a big fight. You know, maybe it leads to Bud Crawford at 154. The sky's the limit if he scores a victory over Tim Tszyu in this win, you know, in this fight. So yeah, it means everything. What does a loss mean for Brian Mendoza? It would hurt him, but that's the thing. Brian Mendoza's coming into this fight kind of with nothing to lose. I mean, he's already lost twice in his career. He was not favored to beat. You know, I don't think a lot of people thought he was gonna beat Jason Rosario, but they damn sure didn't think he was gonna beat Sebastian Fundora, and he knocked his ass out. And you know, so Brian Mendoza's coming into this fight with that attitude, like, hey, I don't care if I lose this fight, because I'm still gonna have opportunities going forward. And that's the thing. I don't think a loss hurts Mendoza as bad as it would hurt Tszyu. Not even close. It's because Mendoza's the underdog, and he's used to playing that role. And not a lot of people think he's going to win anyways. And he's young, and he's still going to get opportunities going forward. So I don't think a loss hurts Brian Mendoza as bad. Now, of course, any loss hurts, but it's not going to be as bad. So, yeah. Now, is it better for boxing if Tszyu wins this fight or Brian Mendoza? It's absolutely better for boxing if Tszyu wins this fight, because we don't know how good Tszyu is. I think we have an idea on Brian Mendoza, but what if we're wrong? But Tszyu is undefeated. He's carrying his father's name. He's trying to be great. A win here just sets up bigger fights, and that Tszyu name, he can ride that wave and ride it out, and it's still a big deal. So I believe that is a big fight, or that it's better for boxing if Tszyu wins. But Brian Mendoza is a very good story. He has an entertaining style. He's got power, and he's American. That goes a long way. It wouldn't be bad for boxing if Mendoza pulled off the upset. It's just better if Tszyu wins. So now, my prediction on this fight. Who do I think is going to win the WBO junior middleweight title fight between Tszyu and Brian Mendoza on Saturday, October 14th on Showtime? I'm picking Tszyu. He's at home. He's red hot. He's hungry. He wants to prove that he's the best at 154. And I think he knows bigger fights await him with a victory here. And I just think Brian Mendoza is somewhat your gatekeeper type guy. But I also don't know how good Brian Mendoza is yet, because he did lose to Jesus Ramos, but Ramos is fighting Erickson Lubin this Saturday. I think we might get a better idea based on how good Ramos is, because we don't know how good Ramos is. He's only 22. But he also was losing one-sidedly to Fundora, but is that really a shock given how big Fundora is? With a style like Mendoza? That's the thing. I don't know if we know how good Brian Mendoza is, but I'm starting to have a good idea of how good Tszyu is. And Tszyu dominating Tony Harrison the way he did, and just absolutely obliterating Carlos Ocampo, but also kind of shutting out Terrell Gaucher after that knockdown. I think Tszyu's the better fighter. He's at home. He's hungry. I think he's going to break down Brian Mendoza and stop him in the late rounds or get a deserving decision victory. But I do think Mendoza is going to be competitive. And I do believe Tszyu's got to be careful of Mendoza's power. And I think it's going to be a better fight than people think it's going to be, because Mendoza is not a pushover opponent. So make sure you check this fight out. Saturday, October 14th in the United States on Showtime, but 15th in Australia. And it's going to be entertaining. It's going to be good. The WBO Super Welterweight Junior Middleweight Championship at 154 pounds is on the line. This is the Tszyu versus Mendoza breakdown video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, smash the like button, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. I appreciate any and all support. This is True Boxing. You've been hit with the truth.